How's it going, everybody? It's Razine here for Astrophotography, and in today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to edit this image of the moon using the free software GIMP. Now, a lot of people have asked for more GIMP tutorials and I'm happy to oblige with that. We're going to begin with this lunar tutorial, moving into more down the line. So if you want to grab this image to edit along with me, it's in the video description. The stacked and ready for processing image is in the description down below. So grab that, download it, put it into GIMP, get yourself a drink, and we're going to jump into GIMP and do the tutorial now. So hope you enjoy it, hope it's helpful for you. So here we are in GIMP. Hopefully you've got an image of the moon yourself, or you've downloaded the file from the description below. The version of GIMP I'm using is version 2.10.32. And the image here we're looking at is, it was shot with my Skywatcher 80 ED refracting telescope and a ZWO ASI 533 MC Pro. So as normal in these kind of situations where you stack and finish pre-processing these kind of images of the moons, they usually come out looking grey. We can see on the histogram here, everything's down on the left hand side. A histogram, if you're unaware, the left hand side are dark areas, blacks and things like that. The right hand side are the whites, highlights, etc. And in the middle you've got all your greys. And if you can't see a histogram, go to Windows, Dockable Dialogues, Histogram. So this is pretty normal. The histogram is usually down the far left hand side because, well, we can see that there's a lot of black area on this image, and that's why it's all on the left and it's very high. The height of the bar indicates how many pixels of that value there are. So there's a lot of black pixels here. Anyway, we're going to get onto the actual editing itself. So the moon, not only is it grey, it's also dark. So I like to use a lot of individual layers when I edit in GIMP. And I'm just going to go to duplicate layer. So I'm going to begin. I always like having a base layer available. And this one is going to be a curve brighten layer. So we're going to go to colors and curves. Curves, you can see the histogram here. And what we can do with curves is manipulate the values of these areas. So on the left hand side, we can pull this bar over to say we want to increase the brightness of darker pixels, just like this. And we can see that it's brightened the moon. Now that's a bit much right now. I only want to brighten it a little. That's fine with me. And so now we can see the before and the after. I'm going to duplicate another layer now. One thing about brightening like this is it flattens the image, so you kind of lose contrast. So now I'm going to do a contrast curve, which again is a curves adjustment layer. Now to increase the contrast, contrast is the difference between dark and light areas of the image. So if we pull this line down on the left hand side, we make the image darker in these areas. But if we then pull it up on the right hand side, we can bring back the lightness in the brighter areas of the moon whilst keeping the darkness in the darker areas of the moon, just like this. And this is how you increase contrast in an image. There is a brightness and contrast window if you prefer to use that. I prefer using curves because curves give you a lot of control. You can make very complex shapes with curves. So you want to darken that bit, but you want that bit a little bit brighter, and then you want to darken there again, or brighten that bit. However, you want to keep the highlights a bit low. I mean, it looks horrible, but it's just an example of how you can use curves to make very complex shapes. Okay, and now I'm going to duplicate it again, and I'm actually going to start adding some color in now. So I'm going to do saturation 1. When I add saturation to images of the moon, I prefer to do lots of smaller adjustments rather than going in whole hog on one. So I'm going to go to color and saturation. And what I mean is, instead of just ramming this all the way up to 3.5, it's added color, yeah.
but you don't really have a lot of control. So I prefer doing things like 1.5. If we knock that off and knock it back on, you can see the color is just beginning to appear. So I'll duplicate that layer, saturation 2, and I'm going to do it again. So colors, saturation. I'm going to increase the colors again. Yep. And normally I find about 3 works nicely, so I'm going to do a saturation 3. Again, hue, colors, saturation, up to about 1.3 or whatever. These numbers are quite arbitrary. I go by eye. I can't give you any fixed numbers to work with because everyone's images are different. So if we zoom in now and have a look what's happening on saturation 1, you can see a little bit of blue and brown began to appear there. Saturation 2 just added a bit of a more color overall. However, saturation 3 is where the colors really got boosted. And now I'll do new from visible. And now what I would usually do is change the color temperature of this image. So I'll call this color temperature. And I'm going to go to colors and color temperature. Now I don't touch the original temperature. I normally only deal with the intended temperature. If you go to the right, you warm the image up. If you go to the left, you cool it down. So I can't give you a scientific way of choosing this. I'm going more on the artistic side. So do what feels right for you. So in this case, I feel like I want to warm the image up a bit. But again, if you think you're too much brown in it, you could cool it down. So take the split view off, I can see everything that's going on here. So I think about 7,000 is fine for this. So you can see it's just warmed it up ever so slightly. This is off, this is before, and this is after. Warming it up does help boost the colors a bit and adds a bit of color to the surface of the moon. Now what we can do from here is, if you really want to, you could add a bit more saturation if you feel like you need to go that way. Good work. It's adding a lot of color to the surface. You may or may not like that. In this case, I think I'm going to just knock it down a bit, just a very minor saturation increase. However, what we can also do now is if we duplicate and we can do selective saturation. So with selective saturation, what I'm going to do is go to colors and hue and saturation. And as we can see, it's slightly different. The layout is slightly different. What hue saturation allows us to do is select a specific color hue and adjust only that one. So if I put the split view on here, and we're going to focus on this lake, I believe it's a lake. If I click blue and I raise the saturation, we can see only that part of the image is changed. If we look at the brown lakes up here, nothing's happening to them. So it's only affecting areas with blue tones. Same with cyan. There's not much cyan in this image. So as we can see, if I manipulate it, we can see where the cyan is, and there's so little of it, it's negligible. So I'll just reset that. And I'm going to go into blue. You can change lightness, but it's very sensitive. So I want to increase the saturation a bit. And if you really want to make a deep saturation boost, you drop the lightness a touch as well. So that's the before and that's the after. Now with areas such as these brown areas, you need to know a bit of color theory. So to make brown, it's red, blue and yellow all mixed together. But if you really, in these images, if you increase the red, you can see that the surface is increasing color. Again, we can change the lightness and you can see where it's manipulating. It's not in yellow. And we know it's not in brown. It's probably in magenta for this image. Yeah. Magenta, purple, a mixture of red and blue. So I'm going to increase the saturation a bit. I'm not liking that, because we can see what's happening around here. It's not coming out nicely, so I'm just going to reset that color. I'll just do a master if I want to increase that brown. So that's a bit of a selective saturation boost. If you really want to get exact, you can use color selects and masks and things like that. But this is just a basic tutorial about how to edit the moon. Okay, so from here, if you think now the image is really looking a bit too warm now, again, you could go in and do a color temperature again. So you could cool it down, or warm it up. I love the split view function. In this case, I think I actually want to cool the image down ever so slightly. Now this might seem counterintuitive from earlier where I warmed it up, but as you can see, when you start adding the saturation to the image, everything changes a bit. So the fact that we can just go in and change these after the fact really adds a lot of flexibility to our editing. All right, now that I've shown you how to add saturation and stuff, we're gonna sharpen this image a bit. So I'll go new from visible, and I'm gonna go for sharpen. So sharpening is gonna help pick out a lot of these edges of the image and just make it pop a bit more, add a bit more depth to the image. So we go to filters, enhance, and sharpen. Now the unsharp mask is a very harsh tool. You can see the before and after here. Radius, as you can see, changes the intensity and how much it spreads out. And amount is the one that's really going to add the sharpening. It's kind of like the wavelets tool in Registax. So in this case, I probably want to add just a very little bit. I think I want to back the radius back a bit. You can add a threshold if you want to just have even more control. I'm fine with that. If we zoom out and look at the full picture before and after, it's a very subtle change, but it's just a bit more defined in areas. There is another way of sharpening as well, and it's called the high pass. High pass is a secret weapon when it comes to sharpening images like the moon and areas of galaxies and things like that. So we go to filters, enhance, and high pass. And we see it puts a grey tone over the whole image. Standard deviation here kind of is masking. It changes the affected area. So as you do it up, the more you can see the image below, the less it's affected. Okay, so the more I can see these areas, like especially these craters, the less they're going to be sharpened. So inversely, the lower the standard deviation, the less you can see. It's like masking just the edges of what you want to do. And then contrast is as contrast sounds. It kind of increases the intensity of the sharpen. So in this case, it would be very harsh and you would have a very chalky image. And the other side, this would be very subtle and almost not much point. So I'm probably going to do a contrast of about 0.8. Now you might be wondering what we're going to do here. Everything's grey. And we're going to go into mode here and change the blending mode to soft light. And there we go. Soft light hides all tones of middle grey. So here is what we'd call middle grey. Look at the histogram, middle grey. And the contrast and the standard deviations, what we've picked has changed the tone of grey, let's say. So now this is 50% grey, whilst this might be 30% grey, and those might be 80% grey. So when we actually change to the soft light function, blending mode, all 50% grey is hidden, but anything that isn't 50% grey shows through. And that is how we get the sharpening effect. You can see on this one, it's quite subtle. I feel with sharpening, less is more. But allow me to do a very harsh sharpen just to show you what I mean. So you see by the contrast, I've completely pumped that up. This is going to be a very, very harsh sharpen. And if I change this to the soft light, you can see the difference here. It's sharpening so much, it's taking on a green tint. Compare that to this sharpen. I know which one I prefer. However, you can always control this as well. Like if you've done one of these very intense sharpens, if you lower the opacity here, you can kind of hide the crime and make a very high contrast sharpen subtle. However, you're still sharpening that green tint. Move from visible again. And from here, it's really looking at the image and seeing what else you want to do. Is it still too dark? If it is still too dark, well, you can do a curves adjustment. And I quite like how that's come out now. Is the color temperature off? If it is, then you know to go into color temperature, or do you want to add more saturation? So I'm quite happy with this without using masking and advanced techniques like that. This is quite a nice image, I feel. Finally, you then go to File and Save As. And you can name it what you want. This will be a GIMP document. And if you want to export this out, you can then go to image and canvas size if you need to resize it. Or then just go to File, Export As. If you want to change the extension, you have to type it in here. So if you want to do a JPEG, JPG, and then export to full quality, and that's done. Just as an extra, if you are looking at this thinking it's a bit purple, a bit magenta, on the opposite side of magenta on the color wheel, it's green. So to fix that, we need to add green. So to do that, what I would do is go to colors and color balance, and in the shadows, I would add maybe 2 points of green. You need to be very subtle here because the changes adds up very quickly. And you need to look at all parts of the image as well. So 2 parts, green in shadows, midtones, can be more around the surface here. 1, maybe 2. You can see it's very subtle. And then the highlights, you want to see where it's affecting, you just make it quite extreme. See that bit there. Maybe if we go down a little. Nope. I don't think I'm going to do much in the highlight sections. Oops. I'm happy with that. And now I feel like that just looks a little bit better. So before, I feel like this had a bit of a purple tint to it. And I feel like that looks a bit better. Again, you can always change the opacity, and that's about where I want it. So I'm happy with that. So hope that's been useful. We've covered a few tools. We've covered curve adjustments, saturation increases, how to add contrast to an image, change color temperature, and even how to remove tints on the image. These parts here, they're from shooting and stacking artifacts. If you really wanted to calibrate those out, it's going to be a lot of masking, feathering, specific selections. It's going to be quite a lot of work. So yeah, I'm going to leave that here now. Hope this video has been useful for you, and let me know in the comments down below if there was a certain bit, a specific part of this video that really where the penny dropped for you. Also, let me know in the comments if there's any other tutorials you want using GIMP. Thanks very much for watching, everybody. Hope you have clear skies, keep looking up, keep them cameras clicking. I'll see you later.